It is a scam when you don't allow everyone to operate on fair terms.
We are the Robin Hoods of sports betting. We take something back from the rich bookies and enable our customers to beat them instead.
G'day everyone. We are at episode 49, nearly lifting the bat for the half ton, if you're a cricket fan out there, of the Trademate Sports Betting Podcast. Today I'm joined by pro sports bettor Rob Pizzola. Welcome to the podcast, mate.
Thanks for having me.
No, anytime, mate. I thought I'd mention off the top that I kind of based all my questions that I've written down here based on a podcast that you did a couple months ago, Bet the Process with Rufus and Jeff. So, if anyone is, maybe that's a good idea for people to go listen to that before they listen to this. It was a fascinating podcast. It's really interesting hearing a discussion between pro sports bettors and people that do this for a living. And it was some fabulous insight, mate.
Thanks, I appreciate it. I mean, I've known Rufus now for several years, and we have a pretty good banter back and forth. Now we're kind of like competing against each other in golf markets as well. He still pretty much owns the golf market, I would say, but it's trying to chip away at that and trying to pick his brain a little bit has been fun over the last few months with not much else going on because of COVID. Yeah,
well, can you explain a bit of that to me? Because that was one of the most startling things I heard on the podcast. I was like, I know you probably have complete confidence in your models and what you do, but does that not, like when you hear someone like Rufus, who's, almost betting against having the opposite pick as you every time, what does that do to you? Like, how does that make you feel?
It was the first time we discussed it. It just kind of came up organically. Like I was checking a golf leaderboard on my phone, like Rory, I don't know, 3-putt or something like that. And Rufus is like, well, I bet against Rory this week. And I'm like, well, I'm on him. He's like, well, who else are you on? And I kind of went through my list, and he was very much opposite on the list. And the immediate thought is, this person's a very good golf bettor. I'm ending up on the opposite side of everything. Do I have to revisit everything I'm doing? I mean, that's the first thought that pops into your head. But then obviously, I pride myself on getting the best numbers available. And I'm thinking in my head as well, I'm betting these guys and the market is tending to move with me as well. So I think what ended up happening is over the course of 5 to 10 minutes, we realized we're getting vastly different numbers, whether that be through different sports books or just the timing of our bets, where the market kind of settles somewhere in between for the most part. So there's positive expected value on both sides. It's very difficult for a lot of people to kind of grasp that concept. Well, how could two people be betting complete opposite sides and both be successful? It's rare, but that was kind of what we arrived at after talking about it. It's still concerning. Like I do respect Rufus quite a bit, especially with the golf craft. Like he's always been known in market as the guy that beats golf. So it's troublesome whenever you hear something along those lines, but you kind of got to not let it get to you, especially when you're betting lines that are like 40 or 50 cents off of what he's potentially played.
I guess maybe the simplest way to explain it is that if you're betting different sides, you're getting the price you want, and then he's getting the price he wants. And then I guess they're by the time the market closes, you guys have found value. Is that the best way of putting it? Yeah.
So essentially, that's exactly it, right? I mean, I have a threshold for which I'm going to play either side in a golf matchup or any sporting event, right? I'm not going in saying I'm going to bet this side at whatever number. I create a number, and depending on where the market moves, I could end up on either side.
Yeah.
And that's just, Rufus starts betting very early in the week. I don't necessarily. There could be just some differences between our methodology that we're arriving at different numbers where we find value on different sides. Doesn't seem to be the case here. It's more so the timing of the betting and the way that the market is moving that we just end up on different sides. I still talk to Rufus. I have a lot through COVID about golf on a weekly basis. I will say we ended up on a lot less opposites as the year went on, which was a little bit nicer. So maybe it was just something that we noticed for a few tournaments here and there. And the markets are constantly evolving as well, too. You'll see some weeks for golf, matchups will move like very quickly, and the prices will move massively versus some weeks where the market is a little bit more quiet. So just a lot of things that go into it, but ultimately you got to try not to let it get into your head, or else it's just it'll eat away at you.
Yeah, was there ever a point where you thought, mate, should we just team up?
Well, that won't happen. So, like, I'd love to team up with Rufus with golf, like a divide and conquer approach. I know it's sports I'm pretty good at myself, and probably I'd argue that he would admit it, that I have a higher ROI on those sports than he does. And there's approaches where you can split up and divide and conquer. I currently work with a partner of sorts already, so now you're spreading yourself really thin when you start to, open it up even more. But there's been those conversations like that happens in sports betting. People look to help other people in return for something of value to them. Most of the time it's not, it could be sharing of picks or sharing of numbers pertaining to a certain sport. It could be access to different accounts or things of that nature, but it's not unheard of to kind of partner up with another pro in order to, benefit both of you guys, I guess.
Do you get many people approaching you?
I get through Twitter. I get probably a handful of requests a day to move my action, which I deny, and I'm comfortable with who's moving my action right now, and it's not an issue for me. For the most part, I still get the average casual recreational bettor just asking me for picks in general, which I'm not a big fan of. Like I would rather give them some insight into the process of how I make picks rather than just give them a pick. Also, another thing I've noticed over the course of the years is I can tell someone to bet, I'll just use a baseball example, but if I said bet the Yankees at minus 120, that player might not, that person who messaged me might not see that message for hours. They might go to their sports book, it's minus 135, minus 140. They'll bet it anyways, which at that point, they're just kind of doing themselves a disservice. So I've really gotten away from giving out picks over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, just because I don't feel like I'm really providing value to people in doing that. But on top of that, to answer your original question, I would say there's requests pretty heavily to work with me in some capacity, whether that be moving for me. I'd like to be your intern and just come on board and like run numbers for you and get some insight into your process. I get a lot of that as well, but I tend to keep it pretty tight knit right now.
Yeah, I get the same thing from a lot of people that I talk to. They say there's absolutely, especially professional sports players, absolutely no point in me giving you a pick, because obviously I'm going to get on it myself first. And by the time I give it to you, the prize is completely gone. But I guess people just want that, that quick tip. No, they don't have to go listen to an hour-long podcast. They don't have to go watch a video on YouTube. I guess that's just like the culture we live in today.
It's why the tout industry survives, right? I mean, funny enough, I know people who they've been burned by different touts before, and then they just move on to another one, like another and another and another, and it's that you're right. It's very like quick, easy. Just give me what I'm supposed to play. I don't really want to think about it, and I think that does draw a lot of parallels to society nowadays, just in general, and how human beings think. But yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, it's not like I didn't put in a lot of work to get to where I am, but probably not as much as people seem to think. Like there seems to be from a casual sports bettor, like, modeling or just try like understanding all the concepts associated with betting. It seems to be a really steep hill to climb for a lot of people. And in reality, I really don't think it's that steep. I learned everything I knew through just like Google searches, honestly, for years, and just doing my own research, and as a casual, like part-time thing I did on the side. And I guess the challenge is people don't either have the time or just don't want to put in the work nowadays. But it's really not as steep a hill to overcome as most would think it is.
Yeah, I remember when I first started working for Trademate, Marius, who's the CEO, the first thing he said, he goes, just read our ebooks. And it probably took me, 2.5 hours to read. And I think my betting knowledge, like, more than quadrupled. Like it was, and it's not, it was pretty basic stuff. It's nothing that you could learn from a podcast like this or anything else. Like it's just complete basic stuff. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to ask you on the Rufus topic was, have you looked at some of your other models? Do they compare like in other sports like ice hockey and stuff like that?
So I don't know if Rufus is still betting ice hockey. I know he had ventured into it at one point. I actually don't know. And like the one thing about Rufus, and honestly, most pros in general are pretty secretive. They're quiet. They don't like to divulge a lot of information about what they do in general. I'm pretty open, largely because I started working in sports media. So for me, this is just very natural to talk about these things. So I don't know what Rufus is actually still working on outside of golf. Like I know golf is his bread and butter. I know at one point he was pretty much involved in every sport, but we really don't compare notes on anything else.
Yeah. Okay. So what sports are you interested in at the moment?
So for me, hockey's my bread and butter. I find it to be bit of a softer market than the rest of the major sports leagues in North America. So NHL is a big one for me. This has been really, really weird timing for me because it's very rare that we have NHL going. I mean, it doesn't happen where NHL is going on at the same time as the start of the NFL season. So there's been some overlap in work for me in the past recent weeks, which, it's just unusual for me. But right now, I think like my main focuses are NHL, NFL, which a lot of people are like, why do you focus your time on NFL? And it's more of, honestly, it's more about my passion for football as much as it is the ROI for NFL is fine, but there's not a lot of volume because of just there's only 16 NFL games in a week at the most. So it's, I do focus on it more so for a passion of the sport rather than the extreme profitability side of things, but I do love it. I didn't do college football this year, but normally I would be at this time. And the only reason I didn't is because college football is an extreme amount of prep, in my opinion. And I wasn't confident we were going to have a season this year. I was actually pretty sure we weren't going to have a season due to COVID. I'm surprised that they ended up playing. So I'm not involved in college football this year. But normally around this time of year, be NHL, NFL, college football, and then PGA, which just finished up, which I gravitated to a couple of years ago. So it hasn't been a long-term thing for me.
How does that schedule then? Because I'm not a big fan of US sports. I don't know too much about them. So is there like any time of down period or severe overlap? Do you get like a time of just craziness, and do you get a time of where you can actually relax?
Yeah. So the way I've kind of structured things now is so that I have a lot of time in the summers, right? I live in Canada. I'm in Toronto, which the weather is actually better than people give it credit for, but the winters are still bad and we still have very limited amount of summertime. And I took up golf myself a couple years ago, where I made it a personal goal of mine that I wanted to play like 30 rounds a year. And I try to golf as much as I can in the summer and just kind of clear my head for what's coming in the winter, because winter is very difficult with the amount of sports that I'm betting on. And that's just a personal decision I made through experience, because when I first started betting, it was mainly NHL, NFL, and Major League Baseball. And baseball runs throughout the summer, and those other sports run throughout the winter. And I was basically not giving myself a break at any point. And it was very tough for me to even step away for a day or a week during a season, because I always felt like I was leaving money on the table, right? Like, what if I take a week off and that just happens to be the week in the year where I was going to have, large success? And looking back on it now, it's kind of dumb thought, and you do need to take those breaks. It's extremely helpful. But I did remove baseball from my repertoire just because ROI was going down year over year. What I especially found was that just volume, especially early markets. There's so much betting into early markets in baseball relative to when I first started that it was just hard to get plays at full limits. even now it still is, I would say, early in the morning. So I now take the summers off for the most part. Golf is still going on, but it's not a time-intensive sport to bet on. A lot of it is automated. So I do what I can. I mean, I think for sports bettors, and it's just me personally, mental health is extremely important. If you're not focusing on your mental health, the results won't come, because it just really, really grinds you down and beats you down. So I've tried to make it so that I can enjoy the summers as best as possible.
Well, what are your hours like in terms of, how much time you're spending at the computer and actually betting?
It's not consistent. So that there is a lot of automation set now on my phone here, but like I get alerts essentially whenever prices come into range for me, and I can confirm those plays directly from my phone. So I don't have to be behind a computer all day long, waiting for lines to move into play, seeing what's going on. I still am. Like I am at my computer and I'm doing work here and there, but it's not there was points in my life where I was spending 14 hours a day sitting in a computer chair 7 days a week. And it's not healthy. So I'm very much I've kind of changed. I've changed my philosophy very much over the last few years. Trying to automate things as much as possible, trying to stay relaxed without obviously losing my edge. I don't want to give away what I don't want to leave money on the table either, but it's finding that healthy balance. So right now I'd say like a day like today, which is, the days all flow for me. So I think today's Wednesday, it's the middle of the week. I get up in the morning, I'm up around 7:30. I'm on the computer seeing what's going on. Majority of the middle of the day here, I won't be doing much other than I have all my alerts set for NFL. If prices come into range, I'll probably read some NFL news later on today, anything of that nature. But it's not extremely labor intensive anymore.
Have you ever had a day when nothing came through, nothing came into range?
Oh yeah, there's been like days in a row, which I bet quite heavily on NHL. It's my best returning sport. It would not make sense for me not to try to capitalize on it as much as I possibly can right now. But just like every other market, what I'm really finding is that there's a lot of overnight action, early action, where limits are much smaller. But enough of that is sharp that it's actually shaping the prices to where my volume is a lot lower. So I constantly have that. Like there'll be days where I have 2 or 3 days without an NHL play, which leaves a real sour taste in my mouth. So then I start going back of like, well, do I consider betting earlier at smaller amounts but much more volume? And I've done the math on that. And it still doesn't make sense for me to do that, but it could potentially get there at some point. So there's plenty of times where I have no plays. I don't force anything. I mean, I'm a very numbers driven guy. I'm not going to force something just to have some action or some sweat on the game. But it happens far more regularly than I want it to.
Why NHL or why ice hockey, mate? Like why do you think you found a bit of not really a niche, but like you found your edge there?
Yeah, so like my history as a sports bettor started off horribly, right? I got involved in sports betting when I was in high school and then into university, and I lost a lot of money. Like I don't have no issues admitting that. I think a lot of what I do now is because of my experiences in the past, and just getting to a point where you're like, I need to stop doing what I'm doing because it's not working. I need to find a different approach. I'm Canadian, so naturally, when I started modeling sports and starting to apply numbers to sports, I just started with the sports that I'm most passionate about. So for me, that was hockey and football. Football, I had very mixed success early on. Hockey, immediately, I knew I had found something, and that's pretty much how it started. It was more so like, this is beatable. Like I'm seeing everything here that all the signs are pointing to the fact that I can actually win at hockey. And honestly, I'm kind of known in the North American market as like the hockey guy. I'm not trying to like boost my ego or anything like that, but people don't focus on it. They really don't. I mean, the largest sports bettors in this market most of them are not doing hockey. So I think that's something that's works in my favor as well, just the limited competition in the space. So, I mean, all those things just led me to that sport naturally.
Yeah, very cool. We'll backtrack a bit because I wanted to ask you about what you said before about how you said you weren't profitable at the start. Do you want to talk a little bit about your background and how, I mean, it's an interesting path, mate, because you used to be a radio producer.
Yeah. So, I mean, I started betting in high school and university. I went to university and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I said, I'm going to follow in my father's footsteps. My father was a chartered accountant. I said, I'll do like accounting and economics and study those in university. And in my first year, honestly, I was bored out of my mind and I didn't care for it. At the same time, the poker boom was happening. So I was a pretty good poker player. I was reading a lot about poker. I took a year off of school, played poker for a living, did fairly well, but struggled with the day-to-day grind, so to speak. It just wasn't really meant for me. Like, I was treating poker as a full-time job, playing literally 9 to 5, 8 hours a day. And then 6 months later, I was lucky if I was playing half an hour to an hour a day, just because it was like, it became very robotic and just boring. So I'm like, I'm gonna go back to school and do something. I said, I'm just gonna do what I'm good at. Like high school, I was consistently getting like 99s in computer science and stats. So I said, I'm gonna do a double major in computer science and statistics. So that's what I was studying at university. I was a horrible student in the sense that was really all I cared about. So you're forced to take electives, sociology, philosophy, things that I really don't care about and have no interest in. So what I found myself doing was just going to every year's stat class and computers class. So rather than just doing first year stuff, I was going to first year, second year, third year for all these classes and just kind of doing my own thing. So I was never really going to graduate. I was just kind of trying to build that knowledge base to potentially get a job. And while this was going on, a Canadian company based in Toronto had just launched a radio station called Hardcore Sports Radio, which to me was very unique and right up my alley because it was centered on more so around sports betting than sports itself. I just listening to the station, it was like you would hear 4 guys talking at a bar about sports rather than very structured radio the way it is now that I'm not too interested in. And I used to call in on a daily basis and talk betting with the hosts. And then I just guess called in enough times that the program director there is like, you interested in an internship here? Like, we're looking for some help. And I was doing school during the day, internship there at night. Within 6 months, they offered me a full-time job as a radio producer. Again, I had zero experience and the pay was horrible. Like the pay was $28,000 Canadian. It's basically like the poverty line in Canada, but I was so passionate about sports and I'm like, when am I going to get an opportunity to work in sports? That I took that. I took a job as a radio producer and I ended up just working in media for roughly 3 or 4 years, probably about a year as a producer, and then became an on-air host myself and started hosting my own gambling programs and things of that nature. So that's where it first started. Eventually, I stayed with the same company. I was like, I got to make some more money because this is not paying the bills for me. So I transferred to the digital side of things of the Score. The Score is now, a gambling operator in New Jersey right now, I believe a few other states recently as well. But I was on the digital side of the Score when they had just launched their mobile app. Was a big part of helping that or growing that side of the business, and had a great time there and was doing my sports betting stuff on the side until I just decided I'm ready to take a chance and do this full time. I've built up enough equity and a bankroll where, it's worth the risk. So that was good time in my life and just worked out. But yeah, certainly, I guess not a common path to being a professional sports bettor.
Your journey from like poker, as you said, and not being too interested in some of the subjects at school is nearly the exact same as, I don't know if you've heard him, his name's Jonas Jelstad. He is the founder of, or co-founder of Trademate, pro sports bettor, pro poker player. But yeah, he said the exact same things. I mean, he didn't even finish school, or we call school, or Australians call school. What do you guys call it? Do you call it college or something? Like when you finishing at 18?
Yeah, it's like it's commonly university in Canada. There's some colleges as well, but yeah, that would be.
Oh no, I think you guys call it high school probably.
Yeah, high school. Yeah.
So
we got elementary school to high school to college or university. Yeah.
Yeah, so he dropped out of high school, 17 or something like that, moved to Thailand, played poker for a year, made a lot of money from that, and moved on to sports betting later. So it's quite funny that you guys have very similar paths.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people that I'm connected to in the sports betting industry now started because of poker in some capacity. And either they lost their edge over the course of years, or they just wanted to expand their horizons and moved into sports betting. But there's a lot of poker players that are in the sports betting space as well. And I've especially noticed that in the last couple of years. So, I mean, that seems like a common path because I guess you're already immersed in gambling in some sort of some sense, but it's more of a game of skill. And I think that equates to sports betting, which is similarly skill. I mean, you have a skill in being able to identify value on certain sides, whereas most casino games are not necessarily like that.
Yeah, and I heard in your podcast with Rufus that you were, I assume you were probably just being very successful with ice hockey and posting all your bets on Twitter and stuff like that. And then you were approached in your DMs, like by whoever it was, to basically, can we have your action? In other words, can you go through that, and how long were you posting your bets on Twitter for? I assume it was ice hockey until someone approached you.
So it was actually baseball. I was approached because of posting baseball. I did post ice hockey as well, but it was baseball specifically. I had probably been posting for only 3 months, maybe 3 to 6 months before the first person I ever worked with approached me. That relationship lasted probably less than a month. Just a very shady individual. I'll leave it at that. But my first venture into that was working with someone who is not very trustworthy, and that's, it kind of left a bitter taste in my mouth early on. But I got another approach after the fact from someone else who was much more reputable. And yeah, I mean, the conversation was very honest with me. It was like, we see you posting your numbers every day. Someone's betting those numbers on screen as immediately as you post them. And it's affecting our ability to get down on baseball games. And we agree with you on a lot of the sides. So we'd like for you to not post these publicly anymore. And in order, we'll offer you a free roll, essentially giving me a free bet on whatever I wanted in baseball. And that's how that relationship started, and it kind of grew. But that was probably about a year after I had been posting on a daily basis. But I was I was a noob at that time. It didn't really dawn on me that I had something of value and other people were exploiting it, so to speak. I mean, not really exploiting it because I was posting it for free, but other people were using it to their advantage. So kind of opened my world, and I definitely wouldn't be where I am now had I not developed that relationship very early, because lucky enough, that was a strong partnership in the sense that, again, I was very novice at the time, probably thought I knew a lot more than I did at the time. And they were pretty helpful in explaining how things actually work. And I developed a pretty good understanding of the betting space through that relationship.
You said before that you're kind of known as the ice hockey guy. Can you talk a bit about? I mean, you said that this has probably been for a couple of years now, so I assume your ice hockey models haven't always been the exact same as let's just say 5 years ago. I assume they're a lot different to what it is today. Can you explain like the process of updating and kind of the challenges with that, and how often you're doing that?
Yeah, there's an evolution to it every single year. So every off season, I focus on updating the model in some capacity. Part of what happens, like new data becomes available pretty much every year, and you got to start incorporating that new data. Or at least, I mean, you don't have to, but you should be testing it at least to see if it's going to improve your models. So that's essentially what I do throughout the course of the season is I'm constantly, like, I have all these notepads all around here, and I'm just constantly writing things down, or else I'm going to forget them, of just like to go back in the off season and check this. Is this still worth what it was before? So on and so forth. Should I be using this data set instead of that? A number of things. So yeah, there's a constant updating in the off season every year. I'll say just the biggest changes though are from a data perspective. Like, even thinking back to 4 or 5 years ago in the NHL, it was very, very simple data. Like, there was really no advanced tracking like we have nowadays, and that's really caused me to update things a lot more. Like, I can pull up my original NHL model, and I probably would just laugh at how unsophisticated it was, but it was winning like an incredible amount of money at the time just because there wasn't a lot to work with. And that's like the common misconception in sports betting as well, is like, there's all these unknowns in sports. How are you ever going to like come up with a real probability on a game? And I tell people all the time, I don't have to come up with 100% like the actual probability on a game. I just have to set a better probability than the book is setting. And if I can set better probabilities on the outcome of the game than what's being offered, I'm going to win in the long run. So at that time, even the use of very basic data was easy enough to beat markets. Now it's not the case anymore. There's certainly a lot more hockey data, with more coming at a player level as well, which will force me to refine my focus even further. But that's a given for me every year. I'm always looking for continuous improvement. For me, if you are constantly running the same thing, it will work probably for a period of a couple of years, but it becomes outdated too quickly and you just lose your edge way too quickly.
So you'd never update during a season?
I occasionally do. I mean, there's some times where you'll just see something, like, for example, last year, Major League Baseball, the balls were clearly juiced, meaning that there was going to be more home runs. However they were constructing the ball for baseball last year was producing more runs. And that became very evident early on in the season. And you do have to account for that right away, or else you're going to just be playing unders on every single game and you're going to be losing your shirt. So there are times where you're forced to adapt fairly quickly. There are times where you can leave it to an off season, or just or not necessarily an off season, but to downtime. Like, it's not something that's pressing and needs your attention immediately. So there's I guess it's probably a pretty even split of both, but I will update in season if I notice something is just stands out as not being the norm.
Have you ever tried a different approach, like to the models approach, I guess? Have you ever tried, I don't know, reading numbers or reading the markets or anything like that? Have you tried any other forms of, becoming a pro sports bettor, I guess?
Yeah, so like I haven't really tried a lot. I mean, there was a period of time where I probably spent a year just building models that were based off of the market. So based off of market closing prices, I could derive what the prices should be for upcoming games, just to see how that fared. It would fare well. It wouldn't fare as well as I was doing. So I just said, I mean, I think that actually people can beat sports that way, to be completely honest with you. They don't really have to have any modeling of the games themselves. They can model the market, so to speak, and then get down early on upcoming games. But I've tried that approach just to see what it's like. I think it's a profitable one. Aside from that, I've experimented with different types of models. Like for baseball, I moved into Monte Carlo simulations, whereas I didn't have, do that beforehand, which has its pros and cons. I think it's more of a true like sim of the game and how it's actually going to play out, but it's also much harder to diagnose problems within the model itself. And it's a lot more prone to error as well. So I've tried all sorts of things, and I will continue to do that. It's just in my nature to experiment, to be completely honest. But yeah.
Yeah. So you said that you think it's actually quite easy to be able to read the markets and make judgments based on that in the future. Is like, why is that? Like, I mean, it sounds too good to be true almost. Like if it's that easy, then why wouldn't everyone do it?
I think there's a lot of people that do that based just off of price history. And again, I think they're probably grinding out like a 2 to 3% ROI maybe off doing something like that, which to me is, if I was going to do that, I just put my money in the stock market. Like that's what it comes down to for me is if I was only having a 2% ROI on sports, I'd probably just stop betting sports because there's other more efficient ways to make that 2% in other markets that are much less work. So that's what it came down to for me. But there's inherent challenges associated with modeling in that type of way as well. Like if a key player is injured for one of the teams, how, it's very hard for you to quantify the impact that specific player has on a game and things of that nature. And those were the troubles I had in modeling that type of way in the past. But I know people who do that consistently. There's no one single way to win at sports betting. I think it takes there could be a lot of different unique approaches. There's people who know nothing about the sports betting market, do no modeling at all, and they just pick off different prices at different sports books that look off market to them. And they win over time. So I don't think there's any one way to go about it. There's many, many different ones, but this is the route I feel like there's just more control in this route, and that's why I opted to go that way.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And then the last kind of like just betting centric from your part question that I had was around closing lines. I don't know how much you track the closing lines, but I've heard a lot of people talk, like, in Trademate, we use Pinnacle Sports as, our main benchmark. Is that the same with US sports? Do you think there's a better closing line out there or something very similar?
Yeah, so I'll use either Pinnacle or BetChris, depending on who's offering the higher limits. On Pinnacle has reduced limits a little bit over the course of the last year or so. So there are sports where Chris actually offers a bigger market than they do now. I'm a big believer in closing line value. For me, my purpose as a bettor is to win in the long run, but I want to get a better number than what the market is closing at. And I think that's the most sustainable way to win over the long run as well. So I'm a big advocate of it. I look at it. I look at both Pinnacle and Chris pretty regularly in terms of closing line value. And honestly, like that's pretty much the recommendation I give to novice bettors as well before they start really investing a lot of money, is to track their closing line value before they really get involved.
Yeah, the BetChris thing's hilarious because I've looked at our results on like from all our customers, and our ROI compared to like BetChris compared to Pinnacle is just like nowhere even close. That's why I was so surprised. I think I was on Twitter about a month ago and people were talking about how sportsbooks are copying BetChris's lines essentially. And then I was like, oh, and then I asked a few people and they're like, yeah, you should be tracking BetChris and all this stuff. And I looked at our results and I was like, we're smashing BetChris. It didn't make any sense to me.
I guess, it could largely depend on the sports you're betting as well, because you're not into North American sports. There's a lot of it was
all US sports.
US sports. Okay,
that's what I put into our data tool.
That's actually interesting because I haven't run any log loss on Chris closing lines versus Penny closing lines in a while now. It's probably a good time to revisit that. I probably got that down in my notebook now.
Yeah, and I found it very, very interesting because I guess there was just so much noise about BetChris being, most people were saying it's sharper than Pinnacle just about, for US sports that is. And then I plugged it in. I was like, that is just, I'm letting all our developers know. I'm like, fuck, we've really fucked up on this one. And then we look at, he's like, mate, look at the results. I was like, oh, all right. Well, I look like an idiot now.
Yep.
Yeah. Betting from Canada. I mean, I don't think we've ever talked to someone from Canada before. How does it compare to the US?
Well, I mean, US doesn't have access to Pinnacle, right? I mean, that's one thing. I mean, obviously, you can VPN, you can do whatever you want to get a Pinnacle account, no problem. I don't think it's much different, to be honest with you, other than I can't walk to down the street and place a bet over a counter. Like a lot of I mean, obviously, we're talking about Las Vegas there, but with the regulation that's happening in the US market, that's becoming more frequent now as well. Whereas Canada doesn't have those options, but I've never found it to be an issue. I mean, similarly to everywhere else in the world, there are off-screen PPH sites that exist here as well, where I can get a bet pretty easily. But for the most part, there's no shortage of options. Up until I would say maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, it was a lot harder to get money in and out of sports books being in Canada. But now with the emergence of Bitcoin as a payment option, that's been fairly easy. But that's really the only thing I've noticed over the past couple of years where I think that's substantially different from anywhere else.
Yeah, okay. I've got some questions that I really don't like asking, but it's sometimes you get some good stories and some just some fun stuff. I guess it's not in line with anything that Trademate Sports advocates for. It's for more the gamblers out there. Your best betting story, mate?
Oh, my best betting story.
I should have told you about this before so you could get something really good cooked up.
Yeah, oh man, there's a few there's definitely one that comes to mind, but I actually can't say it on air. Oh man, best betting story. I honestly, I live such a boring life, man. The best. I won't give specific, but the best betting the first time I ever got quote unquote inside info on an event, just like knowing the outcome of an event before it was going to happen. Now, this wasn't a major market or anything like that. It was essentially, I mean, people should be able to put this together. They'll have an easy hypothesis, but I just, I mean, it's not even a great story. It's really a horrible story, but I just like remember the excitement I have of like trying to get money down on this event as much as I possibly could. And this is like the only time I've ever worked with competing groups to get money down. But there was like this, it was well before Zoom. I don't even know what we were using, like Google Hangouts or something, where everyone was watching it at the same time, kind of in a Google Hangout, because by the time we had gotten everything down, there was like tons of money on this event. And it was a pretty cool to experience, like people that I notoriously either dislike or don't work with or compete against, all rooting for the same outcome on an event just because we're collectively working together to get down as much money as possible. I think that was a pretty cool experience for me that likely won't happen again. And yeah, that was it.
And second question that I hate asking, biggest winning and losing bet?
Like actual dollar amounts?
Yeah.
They're both probably in the same range, but like I've never had a 6-figure win or loss in my life. So upper fives.
Me neither, mate.
Just like it would just be a random game. Like I can't even remember the game, but it was probably just a random game where I had a really big edge, likely related to news. So most of the time, like whenever I'm going to end up on a really large play, it's either I know someone is not playing for a team and the market hasn't accounted for it yet. Like hockey goalie changes, for example, like if I know that the backup goalie is going to be in net, but it's not public information yet, I can get down pretty substantial amounts on that. And that's probably my biggest loss ever, would be on a hockey game where there was a very large distinction between the starting goalie and backup goalie, and I knew the backup goalie was going to be in, and the price that was offered was for the starting goalie. So I've had a few of those. December of last year rings a bell for a few of those, but mid to upper 5 figures, yeah.
Yeah, on that subject, how do you stake your bets? Are you looking just to? I mean, speaking to Jonas, he's like, mate, I just get on as much as I can.
I don't. I guess like I've done fairly well for myself, but I don't consider myself to be in the upper echelon of bettors, especially in terms of bankroll and what I'm willing to risk of my own dollars. I do bet using Kelly, a fraction of Kelly, depending on which sport I'm betting and my confidence in the model. So I still am Kelly staking for the most part. That's on major markets. Smaller, like props markets, for example, there's many scenarios where I just get down to whatever I can.
What like percentage Kelly do you use?
I'm using quarter fraction, so 25%.
Okay, yeah, cool. And I also listened on that Rufus podcast. You talked about how you were kind of enjoying the COVID break. Do you think are you sort of thinking about winding down a little bit?
I liked it, especially the break from North American sports. I actually wish it lasted longer, to be honest with you. I kind of crave just. I'm a sports fan. I have been my whole life. Like I'm a hardcore sports fan, but I've just burnt myself out for so many years of sports, especially from the betting side of things, that I really did enjoy the break. When sports first came back, I wasn't even really all that excited about it, to be completely honest. I'm getting really excited now with NFL starting this week, but it could have went a little bit longer and I would have been fine with it. I was enjoying golfing 4 or 5 days a week. It was very welcomed from my point of view. I was exercising, which I typically don't do a whole lot of. I got into a really, really good routine without sports. And then when sports came back, I kind of had to sacrifice some of that routine, which I'm still not happy about. Like, I could have done with a little bit longer.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? How, I mean, once you're working from home, you can, instead of having to go, I mean, maybe you've always just worked from home, but I mean, just speaking with people around my circles, they're like, I mean, working from home is like the best thing that I never knew about, and you can really just set yourself up with such a good routine. You
can, but it involves a certain discipline. Like it takes a certain type of person and certain characteristics to be able to work from home successfully, in my opinion. Like not everyone can do it. For me, it's pretty easy because I am disciplined and I can be very regimented. I've read a lot about working from home in the past and stuff like that, and I've applied a lot of practices. And but just even like getting up from your desk for 5 minutes of every hour just to walk around, honestly, like it seems like nothing. I have a pull-up bar. I just kind of like hang from it and stretch out my back, and like it just like eases some tension. It lets you, and I know a lot of people that really struggle with working from home. It's not in it for them. They need the social interaction. And I'm a social person, but I do get some social interaction, whether it's even through just like WhatsApp or, messaging my friends and things of that nature. It's not to the max, but I don't think it's for everyone. But for me, I personally excel at it because I guess I do have the discipline, and it's easy for me to get into routine and kind of stick to that.
Okay. And then lastly, mate, the upcoming NFL season, and like I said, I don't know too much about the NFL, so you'll have to bear with me. Do you have any, not really tips or anything, but like any big thoughts on the upcoming NFL season? I don't know what it's like, but there's lots of leagues. I guess basically every league that started up during Corona times has had maybe either some sort of rule change or a completely different schedule. Is there anything like that in the NFL?
So what's happening, I think the biggest change in the NFL from a betting perspective this year is going to be how to factor home field advantage. Because there's going to be no fans for a lot of the games. And how much do fans, like how much does fan attendance make up in your overall home field advantage? For me, I think largely home field advantage in the NFL is built off of travel. Like travel is the largest component within that itself. But for me, the approach that I've taken is applying data from other sports that have been back already, and using that in aiding me with my NFL home field advantage. So there's not really much in terms of rule changes, to be completely honest with you, going into the year that I have to account for. But I could see someone getting themselves finding an edge if they're able to account for home field better than everyone else in market. So that's kind of been a focus of mine, is really breaking down these components of home field. How much is each worth? Doing it at a team level as well, which I think is important. I think a lot of people make the mistake of just giving the same home field for every team in the league, and it's not like that. So that's what I've been gearing up for or working on over the course of the last few weeks as a way to potentially get an edge early on in the season.
No, that's a good point to look at it from a team point of view, because I guess for some teams probably don't have to travel as long as other ones do. And I mean, I'm thinking about the rugby league that I follow back home, and there are some teams that have like the schedule. I think it's the two of two. There's two teams who have basically not had to move an inch during the whole season, and they're both in the top four when most people predicted that they would finish outside the top four. And it looks like they might even finish 1 and 2 in the league. So it's a great point that you state there. But I don't know how much, if you've heard of a man called Joseph Bushdahl before. He's a sports betting analyst. I mean, I think he did a piece on this with the English Premier League. He might have done it for the Championship too, but he essentially concluded that from when they came back from the restart, that there was absolutely no home advantage at all. And yeah.
So, I mean, I've kind of concluded the same for hockey right now. Hockey, NHL is being played in a bubble, meaning teams aren't traveling at all. So you remove the travel component. The only real difference for hockey is that the home team right now gets the last change. So they get to see what other players are coming onto the ice at a whistle, and then they get to match whatever players they want, which theoretically you would think would be an advantage, to be able to put out whoever you want on the ice against whatever the other team has put out. But so far that hasn't materialized into any advantage whatsoever. So, I mean, early on, I think the market went from no home ice advantage when numbers were first posted to within a couple games back to like much higher home ice advantage right now, back to pretty much none again. So it's pretty quick. It's funny to see like my numbers and compare it to how the market is playing these games as well. But yeah, I mean, that to me was immediately when they started talking about sports coming back, that was probably the first thought that came into my head, was like, what am I going to do for home field or home court or home ice? And that was challenging. I mean, it was fun to dig into that stuff and kind of tried, like I said, I tried to take like a component approach, right? This is every component that factors in to home field advantage, and trying to define a value for what each one is worth. I've been wrong on some occasions, but again, it's not about whether you're wrong or right. It's whether you're more accurate than other people that you're competing.
Well, then the interesting part with the English Premier League one was that the teams are travelling to and from, to their home grounds and away grounds and stuff like that. So I guess that correlates very heavily to what the NFL is. But I mean, the NFL is probably a bit different. I mean, my US geography is completely, it's shocking, but I assume that they would have to travel further than in the UK.
Oh, for sure. That's what I'm going to get at. It's not apples to apples, because UK is relatively small, so it's not much travel. But West Coast to an East Coast flight in United States could be a 5-hour flight. You're changing. You're moving through time zones, 3-hour time zone difference. Body clock is a factor. Circadian rhythms are a factor. Like there's all these little things that play a factor, and it's very difficult to quantify sometimes. But like, again, you don't have to be perfect at quantifying it. You just have to be better than others. And I look for like these little things all the time. And I mean, everybody's looking at home field advantage right now. It's not like it's just me, but I do spend some time there because I do think it matters.
Yeah, no, mate, that's terrific insight. Looking at it on a team level is, something that's very interesting. I think people should be, if they are, but your average punter's probably not even that interested in it. And I mean, even myself, I never even thought of it from that kind of level. So, mate, yeah, terrific insight, and yeah, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I know we're not the biggest podcast in the world, so it means a lot when we get someone as experienced and well-versed as you, mate. So thanks so much for coming on. And do you want to let the listeners know where they can find you on Twitter or any other projects that you've got going?
Yeah, so on Twitter at my name, at Rob Pizzola. I don't really have much to plug, but I do a live Sunday morning video before NFL every week. And the goal is just to raise as much money for charity as possible. So I'm type 1 diabetic myself. So we raise money for American Diabetes Association and Diabetes Canada as well. And last year we were able to raise over 5 figures, which was nice. Going for the same cause again this year. So if anyone is interested in the NFL and they want some content before games on a Sunday, I do break it down, and hopefully we can raise some money for a good cause. That's what it's all about for me.
Yeah, no, that's terrific, mate. I'll make sure, if I can remember, to put that in the show notes so people can, if you can send me a link of some sort, and I'll make sure to put it in the show notes. That's a great thing that you're doing. But thanks for coming on. And in terms of podcasters coming next for you listeners, we'll be breaking down the EPL game week 2 with Haru and George as always. But other than that, thanks for listening. Make sure to do a quick rate and review of the podcast and subscribe to us wherever you listen. And if you're looking to implement some of the strategies we talked about today, especially value betting ones, start a free week trial of the Trademate Sports software. Thanks again, Rob.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Cheers, mate.